Hi everyone, I'm Shelly and you're watching There's No Place Like Home. I'm back with another video and today's topic is a closer look at the Rephaim. At the very beginning of what I would call my Christian truther journey, the very first thing that I really began to be interested in that was kind of outside of church circles were the Nephilim and the Rephaim. And I've done several videos on the Nephilim, but I've never done one that focused specifically on the Rephaim, which, as this image says, yes, they were referred to sometimes as giant warriors. Sometimes they were referred to as spirits of the dead, or shades is another word that was used. And they were also said to have healing powers. So, while a lot of us who are into this topic typically associate the Nephilim with the Rephaim, and indeed there are connections, the Rephaim do seem to have these powers that the Nephilim did not have. Additionally, one interesting thing as I've been learning about the Rephaim is that most of the time when I have heard the term Rephaim, it has always been to refer to the giants after the flood. So it was always the Nephilim before the flood, and they were the really huge giants. And then the Rephaim were the smaller ones after the flood. However, from the book that I have been reading, which is actually When Giants Were Upon the Earth, The Watchers, the Nephilim, and the biblical cosmic war of the seed, I've been learning some different information from that. Specifically, actually more from his fiction book, his fiction series that does go with this. This is the appendices to his fictional series, Chronicles of the Nephilim. And I have been reading Enoch Primordial. And in Enoch Primordial, which again is the fictional portion of Brian Godawa's books, is that the Rephaim, at least in that, they were the first generation of the Nephilim. So they were the really gigantic ones. They were the kings. And, many of us who have been studying the Nephilim have heard that, yes, these Nephilim, these giants, they were known to be kings, and not just in the Bible, but there are giants spoken of throughout pretty much every other tradition that you can think of. And one of those traditions that we're going to learn about today is actually we're going to read from something called, or read about something called the Rephaim texts. And according to Brian Godawa's book, it says there was a buried library of cuneiform tablets excavated at Ras Shamra from the ancient city of Ugarit during the years 1940 and 1947. They yielded tablets that have been crucial to understanding the development of Syrian and Canaanite religion. One of the corpus of texts unearthed there was what came to be known as the Rephaim texts. So, yeah, I don't know if you knew that, but the Rephaim are not just spoken of in the Bible, they were also spoken of in the Canaanite religion. So let's just read a little bit about these Rephaim texts. The Rephaim text is an ancient Ugaritic poem consisting of three fragmentary tablets discovered in Ras Shamra and dating to the 14th century BCE. The text describes the Rephaim, a group of warrior-like figures undertaking a 3-day chariot journey to a threshing floor, where they partake in a 7-day feast. Scholars debate the identity of the Rephaim, with interpretations ranging from deified ancestors, minor deities, and underworld spirits to human cultic figures associated with fertility rites. The text is linked to the tale of Akkad, possibly as a prequel, and shares thematic elements with El's drinking party. Though the precise meaning of the text remains uncertain, it emphasizes feasting, divine participation, and family lineage, suggesting the Rephaim were semi divine or royal figures with connections to the gods. Now, one thing that I'm hoping that you have noticed if you've been keeping up with my recent videos is that I talked about the cherubim not too long ago. I talked about the seraphim not too long ago. And now I'm talking about the Rephaim. And the interesting thing about these biblical entities, I'll just call them, is that they weren't just mentioned in the Bible. All of these entities did have associations in other literature, in other beliefs. And so today, it's about the Rephaim, but before it was showing you the similarities with the seraphim and the cherubim. And it really does make you wonder. First of all, could this be proof that yes, they were based on actual living giant beings when it comes to the Rephaim? Or could it also be that the biblical authors were taking some notes from the other mythologies and kind of using them to poke fun at these other religions? Now, I do not ascribe to that particular notion. I know that some people believe that. But to me, especially when it comes to Goliath, who was recorded as being one of the Rephaim, or at least related to the Rephaim, it definitely, it was a historical figure. So I just figured, though, that I would put that out there. There are people who believe that this is kind of more to poke fun at the other religions and to say that we are the ones that have the truth. Going back to this is just a Wikipedia article, but that's okay. The identity of the Rephaim. Let's see. Conrad Lahuro, I probably said that wrong, has identified three main approaches to the identity of the Rephaim. The Rephaim are minor deities who accompany Baal and follow him down into the underworld. And what's interesting is that I have a book on demons by Michael Heiser, and he mentioned the Rephaim and mentioned that they are called shades and that they do have associations with the underworld. So that, certainly seems to fit. Um, This person suggested that the meaning of the term eventually evolved to be shades of the dead in Biblical Hebrew and Phoenician. The meaning of the term is shades, as in Phoenician and Biblical Hebrew, and Marvin Pope suggested the similar meaning of deified dead, supported by the fact that deifying the deceased was common practice in the time and place of the composition. John Gray proposed that the Rephaim were actually human cultic functionaries who joined the king on his visits to threshing floors and plantations, as is described in the Rephaim text, in order to promote fertility. There was a fourth opinion that the Rephaim were gods, though not minor ones. According to his conclusion, the term Rephaim may either refer to human or divine individuals or groups. When in the divine context, the singular will refer to the god El, and the plural to all those gods who gather at his invitation. In the human context, it refers to an aristocratic warrior guild under the patronage of El. Similar to Pope, Coogan and Smith suggest that the Rephaim refer to deified deceased ancestors, proposing that they were called healthy ones due to the state of well-being they were believed to attain after death. In Ugaritic texts, the Rephaim were worshipped in the form of feasts and fruit harvests, so that they would grant their blessings of human and agricultural fertility. Based on references to kinship between the gods and the Rephaim in the texts, Jonathan Yogiv suggests that the Rephaim were the mortal descendants of the divine family and acted as demigod kings or leaders who served the gods. And that's something that, you have probably heard of when it comes to Greek mythology, Roman mythology, Norse mythology, Egyptian mythology. Demigods were pretty big in those tales, weren't they? Another interesting thing is that in this feast that we were reading about in the Rephaim text, it was said that the Rephaim of the netherworld, and this is again from when giants were upon the earth. Where was I? The most ancient Rephaim of the netherworld are summoned to assemble as the council of the Ditanu, or it could also be called Didanu. Okay, so this council of the Rephaim that was joined together was called the Didanu, or the mysterious Didanum people. And that immediately made me think of the Celtic Tua Didanin. And in Celtic mythology, the Tua Didanin, I'm just thinking Didanin, Didanu, could there be could they be similar or could they be related to one another? I think it's possible because here we have the Tua Didanin in Celtic mythology, a race inhabiting Ireland before the arrival of the Milesians. They were said to have been skilled in magic, and the earliest reference to them relates that after they were banished from heaven because of their knowledge, they descended on Ireland in a cloud of mist. They were thought to have disappeared into the hills when overcome by the Milesians. The Book of Invasions, a fictitious history of Ireland from the earliest times, treats them as actual people, and they were so regarded by native historians up to the 17th century. In popular legend, they have become associated with the numerous fairies still supposed to inhabit the Irish landscape. Now, something else interesting about the Tua Didanin is that they were said to have gone into the other world, and that also had associations with the underworld or being underground. So here we have another similarity between the Tua Didanin, and then we have these Rephaim that are called the Didanu. And I've gone over in some other videos that the Fae, which is what the Tua Didanin were actually considered, that the Fae, or as that's where we get the term fairy from, they were related to the elves or the elven beings. And if you read Gary Wayne's Genesis 6 conspiracy, he gives a lot of good evidence that does associate these fae or the elven beings with the nephilim. So we always look at that as being, fairy tales, and you might even look at the nephilim as fairy tale. I know that a lot of people do, but there is also a connection between the Tua Didanin, the nephilim. So it certainly would stand to reason that they could very well be associated with the Rephaim too, especially when you think of this Didanu association. So we'll just read some of this article about the mysterious Didanum people. And I leave links in the description for all of the articles and verses that I use. I always leave links to in the description in case you want to go back and take a look at them yourself. But here it says one of the races mentioned in sacred texts, especially Bible texts, are the Didanum people, the precursors of the Nephilim and Rephaim going back to 3000 BC. There are not many references to this race, however, we will try to touch upon what is known about them. Many already know about the Nephilim, the offspring of the sons of gods and the daughters of men, beings of gigantic size with incredible abilities and powers who are associated with the demigods of all different religions and mythologies. In the same category belong the Rephaim, who were also beings of enormous stature and powerful abilities, a generation of heroes. Furthermore, references to the Rephaim in the Bible identify them as shades or spirits, giving another dimension to their existence, as if they were able to interact or manifest at the same time in different realities. In ancient texts, it seems that the Didanites are very closely related to the Rephaim, making them another race related to the lowercase g, gods of the past. In the Epic of Crete, a Canaanite epic of the Bronze Age, which is written in the Ugaritic language found on 3 clay tablets, God El, the father of gods, according to Canaanites, also identified with the Egyptian god Ptah, promises King Carrot that the glory of his family is going to be restored. It mentions the assembly of the Didanites, referring to the Didanum people. King Carrot was a descendant of the Didonites and a ruler of the region around the mountain of the Amorites, as well as Didanum mountain. The importance of the Didanum people was significant, since the presence of the council of the Didonites was required during the ascension of the kings. Um, Here we will just read. It says, in other texts, Didonites appear to be connected to Didan, who also happens to be an important god of the Nubians in Egypt. It is interesting to notice that Didan was a descendant of Noah. The people of Didan were warned by the god, I think God is what they mean, that his wrath was going to fall upon them because Didan questioned the motives of God. Oh, okay. So this is this not talking about the Bible then? Anyway, question the motives of God in the same way that all descendants of the Nephilim were executed by Joshua with the help of God, leaving no traces of them. I like that they have apostrophes around God. No, no, thank you. Anyway, concluding what we can say about the Didanum people is that they were gigantic people, which interestingly, I don't believe that is mentioned in like the Canaanite religion in the Ugaritic texts. I believe that the idea of them being giants comes from the Bible, but I could be wrong. Probably descendants of the gods with great physical and mental power associated in some ways with the royal dynasties of the past. They were so important that their name has been used later on as a title for important royal people. And it says here it's a reference to another strange race of giants. So now if we go to Isaiah 14 verses 9 to 11, you will see that, and this is from Brian Godawa, he said, the Bible also reinforces this ancient Ugaritic understanding of Rephaim as dead royal or heroic ancestors who reside in the underworld, but with a twist. So if we read in verses 9 to 11, it says, Sheol beneath. So we have a reference to the underworld. I'm not going to keep stopping though. Let me just read the whole thing. Sheol beneath is stirred up to meet you when you come. It rouses the shades to greet you, all who were leaders of the earth. It raises from their thrones all who were kings of the nations. All of them will answer and say to you, you too have become as weak as we. You have become like us. Your pomp is brought down to Sheol, the sound of your harps. Maggots are laid as a bed beneath you, and worms are your covers. Now, I already showed you there's the reference to Sheol, the underworld, when it comes to these Rephaim, but I also wanted to show you the word shades in verse 9. I went to the Hebrew for Isaiah 14:9. Now here it says the spirits of the dead, but you can see here that it's shades or ghosts. My cat will not stop meowing. Anyway, and here is the Hebrew, Rephaim, which is Rephaim. Now, going back to what Brian Godawa says about this, he says, to the Hebrew prophet, these proud kings were humiliated in the underworld of Sheol. Their glory became as shades in the light of God. Apparently, the prophet transforms ancient Canaanite mythology into a polemical emasculation of pagan pride. That's one very interesting thing. It's more than one interesting thing because I always think of interesting things that I mention. But another interesting thing is that if you look at the giants and the demigods in these other, mythologies, we'll call them, like the Greek and the Roman and the Egyptian, they're often exalted, whereas the Bible kind of brings them back down because they are nothing compared to God. Then Brian Godawa goes on to say, and again, this is from the book When Giants Were Upon the Earth, but there is another element that the biblical text adds to these royal divinized Rephaim, gigantism. See, I thought it's the Bible that started describing them as giants, similarly to the Nephilim. And he goes on to say the very land of Canaan around Mount Hermon that was called Bashan was described as the land of the Rephaim, and that is from Deuteronomy 3:13. And that says, the rest of Gilead and all Bashan, the kingdom of Og, that is, all the region of Argob, I gave to the half tribe of Manasseh. all that portion of Bashan is called the land of Rephaim. And this was the land whose inhabitants were described as tall giants, like the Anakim. So we're going to go to Deuteronomy 2:11 now. Like the Anakim, they are also counted as Rephaim, but the Moabites call them Emim. So the different tribes had different names for the Rephaim, but they were Rephaim. And then Deuteronomy 2:20 says, "It is also counted as a land of Rephaim. Rephaim formerly lived there, but the Ammonites call them Zamzumim." So here we have the Rephaim being called Zamzumim, and then in the other verse it says that the Moabites call them Emim, but they are all referring to the same group. And these Rephaim, they were related to Goliath, that I'm sure most people have heard of. Even if you are not a Christian, you have heard of David and Goliath. And here we have 1 Chronicles 20, verses 4-8. "And after this there arose war with the Philistines at Gazer. Then Sibbecai the Hushathite struck down Sippai, who was one of the descendants of the giants, and the Philistines were subdued. And there was again war with the Philistines, and Elhanan the son of Jair struck down Lami, the brother of Goliath the Gittite, the shaft of whose spear was like a weaver's beam. And there was again war at Gath, where there was a man of great stature, who had 6 fingers on each hand and 6 toes on each foot, 24 in number, and he also was descended from the giants. And when he taunted Israel, Jonathan the son of Shemaiah, David's brother, struck him down. These were descended from the giants in Gath, and they fell by the hand of David and by the hand of his servants." Brian goes on to say, "When Joshua was wiping out the tribes and cities of giants in Canaan, one of the last ones to go was the mighty Og of Bashan, the last of the Rephaim." And we can read about him in Joshua 12:4, which we will in a minute, but it says that Og of Bashan's bed or sarcophagus was 13.5 feet long. So first let's go to Joshua 12:4 to read about Og of Bashan. "And Og, king of Bashan, one of the remnant of the Rephaim, who lived at Ashtaroth and at Edrei." And Deuteronomy 3:11. Oh, I have it at 3:13. We can go back. Okay. "For only Og, the king of Bashan, was left of the remnant of the Rephaim." So he was the last. "Behold, his bed was a bed of iron. Is it not in Rabbah of the Ammonites? 9 cubits was its length, and 4 cubits in its breadth, according to the common cubit." And we can translate that just by looking above that in the New Living Translation. It was 13 feet and 13 feet long and 6 feet wide. So that was a pretty big bed, wouldn't you say? So anyway, yeah, I just wanted to share this interesting stuff. I really need to find another word besides interesting. Intriguing. How about that? Fascinating. Because yet we have yet another example of some of these characters, we'll just call them, in the Bible, are also known throughout other cultures around the world. And really it's really neat to think about how these connections may have come about. Is it because, there are actual accounts of these actual giant beings? Or could it be that there are biblical authors who are taking these accounts from other religions and kind of tying them into the Bible to prove a point? Again, I think that these accounts seem to be historical in nature, so that's how I take them. But anyway, that's all that I had for you today. If you like this video, give it a thumbs up. If you haven't subscribed and would like to hear more of what I have to say, I would love if you would do that. If you have any questions or comments, you can leave one down below. And if you like my work and would like to become a channel member, I will leave a link in the description box for that as well, or you can just click on it right on my channel page. And I hope you have a great day.